Just a reminder, you're still under oath.
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Frank.
Thank you, Your Honor. I think before we took our break, we were talking about looking at Squad 320, and you had seen an envelope in the squad that when you first saw the vehicle at the scene.
Yes, sir.
And you took that envelope, correct?
Yes, sir, I seized that.
What kind of envelope was it?
Manila envelope.
So paper size.
Paper size, yes, sir.
And at some point, did you examine the contents of that envelope?
Yes, sir.
And do you recall what was in that envelope?
Yes, sir. 2 bills, as well as a pipe, cigarettes, and a card.
Okay. And the bills, you mean money, right?
Correct.
And, Your Honor, if I could show the witness only Exhibit 198. Do you recognize what's depicted in 198?
Yes.
And is this actually a photograph that you took?
I believe so, yes.
All right. Your Honor, we would offer Exhibit 198.
No objection. I've seen the photo.
Do you want to look at it?
Oh, yeah, no objection.
198. Excuse me. 198 is received.
And I'll publish that for the jury, please. And Agent Reyerson, just describe for us what's depicted in Exhibit 198.
With 2 $20 bills, 1 to half.
And these were in that envelope, correct?
Correct.
And did you have these processed later for their legitimacy, I guess the question would be?
Yes, sir. We had them sent to a United States Secret Service.
Okay. And you also mentioned, you can take that down, thank you, that there was a pipe in that envelope.
Yes, sir.
Can you just kind of describe what the pipe looked like?
A glass, multicolored pipe, a few inches long.
And what did you end up doing with that pipe?
Initially, I secured it in my office, and then I submitted it to the BCA laboratory for analysis.
And so just when you're doing your job, you want to submit something to the lab to be tested. What's the process you kind of go through?
I take it into the intake portion of our building, the lab intake portion, and I document, or I note the documentation where I received it from, and I submit it through intake.
And then was a request made to have people in the lab do some further testing on that pipe?
Yes.
And while you were at the scene, when the 2 vehicles were still there, did you make some arrangements for those 2 vehicles?
Yes, sir.
And can you describe for the jury what you did in that regard?
I called Twin Cities Towing and asked for 2 flatbeds to respond to the scene. When they arrived on scene, each flatbed picked up each individual car, the squad car and the Benz.
And what did you do with them then after that?
When I left the scene, I escorted the 2 flatbeds to the BCA headquarters
And just generally, where is the BCA headquarters?
in St. Paul, Minnesota.
And so did you essentially travel with those 2 flatbeds?
Yes.
And when you get to BCA headquarters, what did you do then?
I ensured that the 2 vehicles were secured in the crime scene garage in the back of the BCA headquarters.
And why did you do that?
Part of chain of custody for the 2 vehicles.
And what were you going to have done with the 2 vehicles?
I was going to have the crime scene team process the 2 vehicles.
And so they placed them in a secure area where only BCA personnel could access them?
Yes, sir.
And did you lock them?
Yes, sir.
And from that point, were you aware whether those vehicles were processed?
At that point,
Correct. I mean, were they subsequently processed?
they were subsequently processed, yes.
Do you recall when that happened?
Yeah, May 27th.
And so this would be essentially the next day from when you had them towed?
Yes, sir.
And were you involved in the processing of the 2 vehicles?
I facilitated it, and I was present for portions of it.
And who does the processing of the vehicles?
The BCA crime scene team.
And so same group that had been out at the scene?
Yes, sir. Mackenzie Anderson was the team lead.
Now, because you were the case agent, well, are there other agents assigned to complete tasks for the investigation?
Yes, sir.
And did you or the other investigators attempt to locate other security videos of the incident?
Yes, sir.
And were you able to obtain some additional security camera videos from the incident?
Yes, sir.
And can you tell the jurors where you got those from, or where the BCA got those from?
One video from Cup Foods, and another one from the Dragon Walk restaurant that was immediately across the street.
And, Your Honor, if we could publish Exhibit 1. Recognize what's depicted in this photograph?
Yes, sir.
And you'll notice there's a little stylus on there. You should be. Circle for the jurors where those two businesses are that you obtained the security videos from.
Okay. The first one is Cup Foods here. The second one is the Dragon Walk.
And that's where those security cameras were?
Correct.
All right. So basically on the corner of each building?
Correct.
All right. Thank you. And since you obtained different security camera videos from those two businesses and the body-worn camera videos from the officers, did you attempt to determine if the timestamps in all of those various videos are the same?
Yes, sir.
You told us earlier that the body-worn camera videos were all consistent on time.
That's correct.
And did you attempt to determine if the Cup Foods video timestamps matched up with the body cams?
Yes.
And what did you find?
I found that the Cup Foods video was 40 seconds ahead of the body-worn camera video timing.
And did you also do the same with respect to the Dragon Walk video?
Yes, sir.
And what did you find there?
I found that the Dragon Walk video was 24 minutes ahead of the timestamps noted on the body-worn camera footage.
Basically, you do that by comparing events in both videos, the same event.
That's correct, sir.
And did Cup Foods provide their video to agents with the BCA?
Yes.
And did you have to follow a sort of different process with the Dragon Walk?
Yes, sir.
Can you describe for the jurors what you did to obtain the video from Dragon Walk?
The owner of the Dragon Walk initially did not comply with requests, so agents with the BCA wrote search warrant and executed a search warrant to obtain a copy of the video as well as the hard drive where the video was stored.
And so those were obtained directly from the equipment from the Dragon Walk
Correct.
and downloaded for use in the investigation.
That is correct.
And through the investigation, have you had an opportunity to watch all of that video?
Yes, sir.
And portions of it depict some of the incidents that we've been talking about in this trial.
Yes, sir.
And we've already admitted some of that video, but have you also watched a portion of video that we have labeled as Exhibit 52?
Yes, sir.
And does that match up with the Dragon Walk video that you obtained from the equipment itself?
Yes, sir.
Your Honor, at this time we would offer Exhibit 52.
Objection.
52 is received.
And Your Honor, I'd offer to publish 52 at this time. And while this is running, Agent Reyerson, can you tell us again how far off the Dragon Walk timestamp is from those of the body cams?
Approximately 24 minutes.
And it's fast.
Yes, sir. Ahead.
You can take that down then. And have you also seen a portion of the video from the Dragon Walk that we have labeled as Exhibit 54?
Yes, sir.
And does that appear to be an accurate portion of the video you obtained directly from the Dragon Walk equipment?
Yes, it does, sir.
And Your Honor, at this time we'd offer Exhibit 54.
No objection.
54 is received.
Now, I'm going to ask that we publish this to the jury. My recollection is about 9 minutes long, so I'm going to speed through some of it probably, but if we could publish 54. Your Honor, I'm sorry, I got the wrong exhibit here. This has already been admitted. Let me come back to that in a little bit if I could. All right, I believe it should be Exhibit 55. So if we could, and is that, do you recall seeing that and it being a portion of the Dragon Walk video?
Yes, sir.
All right, I'm sorry. If we could, I'm sorry, can we offer? I'm sorry, I'll come back to that subject in a little bit. Thank you. Agent Reyerson, then, as part of the investigation in your usual cases, does somebody from your agency usually attend the autopsy?
Yes, sir, generally.
And was that done in this case?
No, sir.
Do you recall why?
I believe it was COVID-19 restrictions as per the Hennepin County Medical Examiner's request.
And as part of your investigations, is it typical to obtain a blood sample from the deceased?
Yes, sir.
And do you know if that was done in this case?
Yes, sir, it was.
Can you describe for the jury how that came about?
Special Agent Brent Peterson acquired it from the Hennepin County Medical Examiner, brought it back to the BCA, and submitted it to the lab.
So just so we're clear, that's a sample of Mr. Floyd's blood, correct?
Correct.
And then that's provided to the lab for any testing they might need it for?
Yes, sir.
Right. And at some points in the investigation, did you receive a copy of the autopsy report from the medical examiner?
Yes, sir.
And do you recall what day it was that you received that?
I believe it was June 4th, 2020.
And did that also include a copy of the toxicology report?
Yes, sir.
And prior to that, did you have much information in the investigation about any suspected drug use?
We had preliminary information, but nothing concrete.
And where did
No.
that preliminary information come from?
I believe some of the information was in the audio files of the radio traffic.
And what did that indicate in terms of drug use?
That Mr. Floyd may have been under some influence of some substance.
And did you know at that point what kind of substance,
No, sir.
what form?
No, sir.
Did you know if any drug use was suspected there at the scene?
No, sir.
I want to forward a little bit to the to December then of 2020. Was a subsequent request made to conduct a further processing of the Mercedes SUV?
Yes, it was.
Do you recall how that came about?
Per the prosecution's request.
And what was requested that be done?
A reprocessing of the Mercedes-Benz with particular focus on a few specific items to include a potential pill.
And what role did you play in then the processing again of the Mercedes SUV?
Facilitation. I notified crime scene team lead Mackenzie Anderson, and I was present for that search.
And so was the vehicle brought back to the BCA garage?
Yes, sir.
So when I say brought back, where had it been held in the interim?
A secure lot.
And by secure, you mean where the public couldn't access it?
Correct.
Now, before it's sent to that secure lot, is something done to make sure that it's not entered?
Yes, sir.
Can you describe that for the jurors, please?
We place crime scene tape over the thresholds of all the doors and sign and date to ensure chain of custody, so we know if someone had entered that vehicle or not.
And when you got that vehicle, the Mercedes SUV, back to the BCA garage, did you check the conditions of the tape on the door frames?
Yes, sir.
And were they intact?
Yes, they were.
And did the crime scene team then process that vehicle again?
Yes, sir.
And who was involved as the team leader in the processing of that vehicle?
Mackenzie Anderson.
And were you present during the processing of that vehicle?
Yes, sir.
And at some point then was a request made to reprocess the squad car 320.
Yes, sir.
And how did that come about?
The defense requested to view the Minneapolis Squad 320, and they identified something in the back seat, a pill, and then we facilitated the transportation of that squad back to BCA headquarters and processed it in the crime scene garage.
So the attorneys for the defendants asked to look at the vehicle itself.
Correct.
And that was done where, do you recall?
In the secure lot.
And then was something that they identified that prompted a further processing of that vehicle?
Correct.
They drew that to your attention?
Yes, sir.
And so then did you make arrangements to have 320 processed again?
Yes, sir.
And how was that done?
Through Mackenzie Anderson.
So brought back to the garage?
Yes, sir.
Now, were the seals in place at that point?
When it got back to the garage, no,
Why not?
because they've been broken at the secure lot
For what purpose?
for the defense to view.
So they looked at the inside of the squad car.
Correct.
And did the crime scene team then process that vehicle again?
Yes, sir.
And were you present for that processing?
Yes, sir.
Okay. But did Mackenzie Anderson process that as well?
Yes, sir.
To your understanding that she will testify later about the processing of both those vehicles?
Yes, sir.
All right. So, as part of the investigation, did you also obtain medical records for Mr. Floyd?
Yes, sir.
Did you obtain complete medical records from the facilities where he had been seen?
Yes, sir.
And which providers did you obtain medical records from?
HCMC and Park Nicollet.
And HCMC is Hennepin County Medical Center?
Yes. I'm sorry.
And those records were made part of the investigation then?
Yes, sir.
Incidentally, Agent Reyerson, you yourself in working on the case, have you been in Squad 320?
Yes.
Have you had occasion to start it?
Yes, sir.
Do you know what kind of vehicle Squad 320 is?
It's a hybrid.
What does that mean to be a hybrid?
The vehicle operates both on a gas traditional engine and electronic.
And at opportunities where you started it, were there times when the gas engine would not run?
Yes, sir. The first time we attempted to start it in the crime scene garage, in the first processing, we turned the vehicle on and we didn't hear the gas engine start. So we were initially a little confused.
But did you figure out that it in fact was on?
We did, yes.
So it was running on the battery rather than the gas engine.
Yes, sir.
Do you know if Squad 320 has a catalytic converter?
Yes, sir, it does.
And what is the function of a catalytic converter?
To reduce toxic emissions.
Prior to coming to court, did you have an opportunity to review a video that I'll refer to as a composite video?
Yes, sir.
That is a putting together of two separate videos into one.
Yes, sir.
And did you recognize that as a mix of both Officer King's body-worn camera and Darnell Frazier's Facebook video?
Yes, I did, sir.
And while you were watching it, were you able to determine if they were synced up? That means, were they running at the same time?
Yes, they appeared to be synced.
And, Your Honor, we would offer Exhibit 127.
Any objection?
No objection.
127 is received.
And Agent Reyerson, what I'm going to do is talk about some timing with this video. So I'm going to refer you to portions of it. So we're not going to watch the whole thing, but to specific portions of it. I'm going to ask that 127 be published in that way. And if we can first go to 2019-18. Okay, so the record should reflect that right now we're at 2019-17. That's good. And Agent Reyerson, at this moment in Exhibit 1, is this the approximate moment when Mr. Floyd is placed prone on the ground?
Yes, it is, sir.
And when this happens, around this time period, I'm going to let this run for about 10 seconds, okay?
Yes, sir.
Yes, Your Honor. Restraint. Okay. Grab that.
Now, looking at that 10-second portion, were you able to determine approximately where Mr. Chauvin's left knee is?
Yes, sir. It appears as though it's on the back of Mr. Floyd's neck.
And are you able to determine where Mr. Chauvin's right knee is?
It appeared as though it was on Mr. Floyd's back.
Right here at 2019-28, the hand that's sort of in the center of the photograph, that Officer Chauvin's hand?
Yes, sir.
Okay, wearing a glove.
Yes, sir.
In the videos you have reviewed, was he wearing gloves on both hands?
Yes, sir.
Now I'm going to just speed up to 20-20-45. So the record should reflect we've actually stopped at 20-20-44. That's good. And I'm going to let this just run for 10 seconds, okay?
Yes, sir.
My face dinner bad.
Here, should we get his legs up?
Oh, it's all right.
Oh, just leave him.
Oh, my God.
Just leave him.
Ah!
All right.
The
Parts still sit up.
Now, here at 20-20-55 for the record, we see another video portion within this video, correct?
Yes, sir.
So the right hand, as you're looking at it, the right side of the screen is now Darnell Frazier's video, correct?
Yes, sir.
So this is what you meant earlier when we talked about a composite video.
Correct.
Is there a time during the Darnell Frazier video that it becomes apparent Mr. Floyd stops verbalizing?
Yes.
Or saying words?
Yes, sir.
And that approximately, well, if we could then go to 20-23-59. All right, so we're at 23:58, and I ask that you play this for about 10 seconds again.
Okay.
Bro, but you can get him off the ground. You're being a bum right now. You can get him off the ground, bro. You can get him off the ground. You're being a bum right now.
All right, so is this the moment in the encounter between Mr. Floyd and Mr. Chauvin when Mr. Floyd appears to stop making verbal sounds, talking?
Yes, sir.
Now, prior to coming to court, did you have an opportunity to look at defense exhibits 1045, 46, 47, and 48?
Yes, sir.
I'm going to ask that exhibit 1045 be placed on the screen, please. And can you note for the jurors the timestamp in this exhibit?
23:32.
And so approximately how long after Mr. Floyd was put on the prone position on the ground did this occur? Would it help to refresh your recollection to refer to a note? Sure.
He was placed on the ground at 20:19:18. Yeah, so 4 minutes.
More than 4 minutes?
More than 4 minutes, yes, sir.
And then going back to Exhibit 127, is there a point in time on Darnella Fraser's Facebook video when it appears that Mr. Floyd no longer makes any movements?
Yes, sir.
And I'm going to ask you to go to 20:24:58. (20:24:58). And does this, well, I'll let this run for about 10 seconds too.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I mean, good so far. I need my deals, right?
I think that's cool though, bro. You're a bum, bro. You're a bum for that. You're a bum for that, bro. You get mad.
So is this approximately the time when afterwards Mr. Floyd does not appear to make any movement?
Yes, sir.
For the record, we've stopped at 20:25:08, and in this photograph, the still portion of the Facebook video or the Darnella Fraser video, does it appear that Mr. Chauvin is using his weight to hold Mr. Floyd down?
Yes, it does.
I'm going to ask to show you Exhibit 1046. Can you tell the jurors, the timestamp from this exhibit?
20:26:40.
And so how long after the time that Mr. Floyd no longer appears to be moving is this photograph taken?
Approximately 7 minutes.
I'm sorry, from the previous photograph?
Oh, from the previous, I'm sorry. Approximately 3 minutes.
Okay, so we know that the moment where he stopped moving, we had as roughly 20:24:58, correct?
Correct.
And so from that time to the time on this photograph is about how long?
From 20:48.
From 20:24:58 to 20:26, roughly 2 minutes, right?
Yeah, 2 minutes.
So Exhibit 1046 portrays a time after Mr. Floyd had appeared to stop moving.
Correct.
Are you able to tell from the Darnella Fraser video when the paramedics arrived?
Yes, sir.
So I would like to go back to 127 then and advance to 20:27:20. All right, so here the record should reflect we're at 20:27:18. That's close enough, and I ask you to play about 10 seconds of that.
When you 1087, bro, you're a bum, bro. 987, bro, you're a bum. First thing you want to grab is your mace if you scared, bro. You're a fucking minority, you're fucking bum, bro.
Actually, let's just keep rolling for about 10 more seconds, please.
Like, bro, 3 minutes, bro. You're not fucking losing. Bro, he's not even fucking looking.
So there we saw one of the paramedics walking up, correct?
Correct.
And so the timestamp here is 20:27:40, correct?
Correct.
And now I'm going to toggle back, I'm sorry, to Exhibit 1047. Do you see the exhibit there?
Yes, sir.
And the timestamp on Exhibit 1047, you see that?
Yes, sir.
And then also to Exhibit 1048,
Yes, sir.
do you see the timestamp there?
Yes, sir.
Do those two still photos depict a time after the paramedics arrived?
Yes, sir.
Based on your work on the case and your review of the videos, is there a moment in Exhibit 127? You can take that down. Is there a moment in Exhibit 127 where you think you can see better the placement of Officer Chauvin's right knee?
Yes, sir.
And I would ask to go back to 127 at 20:28:43. All right. 20:28:43. And what I'd like to have you do, Reyerson, while we're frozen here on this moment, if you would take the cursor and illustrate to the jurors where Officer Chauvin's right knee is. All right. And so what I'd like to do then, I'll remove that and have the video played. Okay, you can go ahead. Okay, we'll just stop the video there. Were you able to see there when he had his right knee on Mr. Floyd's back?
Yes, sir.
Your Honor, to keep things moving, I think I will deal with that previous video at a separate time and continue. That's all I have. Thank you.
Sure. We'll take a moment.
Your Honor, subject to recalling Mr. Reyerson or Agent Reyerson, there's one issue that we have to clean up, but I'm prepared on other matters.
All right.
Good afternoon, Agent Reyerson.
Good afternoon, sir.
Thank you for being here. So you testified that you were the primary case agent in this particular case, correct?
Yes, sir.
And it's fair to say that the BCA's investigation into this case was fairly extensive, correct?
Yes, sir.
You would agree that approximately 50 BCA agents were involved in this case in one form or another?
Yes, sir.
Those BCA agents were frequently paired up with agents of the Federal Bureau of Investigation or other law enforcement agencies?
That's correct.
Would you agree that roughly 25, 26 FBI agents participated in your investigation?
Yes, sir.
Would you agree that ultimately, all things told, the BCA executed approximately a dozen search warrants in this case?
Yes, sir.
There was an extensive amount of information that was gathered by the BCA. Agreed?
Yes, sir.
A lot of that information is ultimately has no bearing on this case. Agreed? Meaning, interviews were conducted, for example, of people who didn't see anything.
That did occur. However, I believe that our investigation was very thorough.
Right. And that's what I'm trying to just gather. It was more than just watching a few minutes of video, piecing a couple of things together, interviewing a couple people, right?
Yes, sir.
In fact, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, that roughly 200 citizen witnesses were interviewed in this case?
Yes, sir.
And so when we break down and we look at those citizen witnesses, the purpose of any investigation is to gather as much information as is possible, right?
Yes, sir.
And to preserve that information for further review to determine at a later point if it does or doesn't become relevant to a criminal investigation, right?
Yes.
So in terms of, say, the citizen witnesses, the BCA agents interviewed many witnesses who did not observe. They weren't present, for example, correct?
Yes, sir.
People who live in the area. Agents went and canvassed the area, knocked on doors, talked to people at local businesses, and they said, oh, I wasn't there at that time, I was somewhere else, right?
Correct.
BCA agents worked hard to identify people who may have seen some portion of that, correct? Of this incident, correct?
Yes, sir.
So things that BCA agents did would include trying to read license plate numbers on cars that were passing by, looking up the registered owners of those cars, and going and interviewing them, correct?
Yes, sir.
And sometimes people acknowledged being in that area. Sometimes they said, oh, we weren't there,
Yes, sir.
right? There were also witnesses that the BCA agents interviewed that provided just sort of background information, right?
Yes, some, sir.
So, for example, the owner of the vehicle that was being driven by Mr. Floyd was not present that day, but she was interviewed, correct?
I believe so, yes, sir.
Right. And your job as the lead case agent is to sort of quarterback all of this, right?
Yes, sir.
And as other agents receive information, you take it and you maintain a data file, correct?
Correct.
And every time a BCA agent performs some task, the way the BCA works is a new report is generated for that particular task. Agreed?
That is correct.
So rather than having one officer write a long narrative police report, they will write several police reports instead, right?
That's correct.
And to date, over 400 BCA investigative reports have been prepared in this case. Agreed?
Yeah, specifically 440.
So we're at almost 450, and some of those reports are even being generated now as we speak, correct?
Possibly.
Right. And in fact, we just went through this analysis of an exhibit, and you compared it to some other exhibits that were already presented. That's something that literally was probably just done today, right?
Possibly, sir.
Right. I mean, the analysis that you just did here on direct examination, you never wrote a police report about that, right?
No, sir.
And that's because those exhibits were just introduced in court, right?
Yes, sir.
And so, now in addition, this investigation took a lot of different twists and turns. Would you agree with that?
Yes, sir.
In part because of kind of what was going on in the city at the time,
Yes, sir.
right? So, for example, certain pieces of equipment belonging to Officer Chauvin or other involved officers were located in other places, right?
That is correct.
And those investigations kind of were turned into this investigation and became a part of this investigation, globally speaking.
Yes.
And because of the profile of this case, the BCA maintains like a tip database line, right?
That is correct.
And it's fair to say that a number of citizens called in with information or what they perceive to be information.
Yes, sir.
And it's the BCA's job to follow up on every single one of those little pieces of information. Right?
Yes, it is.
And ultimately, in following up on those little pieces of information, oftentimes you can see that, I mean, this is irrelevant to this case, it's something else, or this person may just want to share their opinion, right?
Yes, sir.
And so this investigation has been ongoing essentially since May 25th of 2020.
Yes, sir.
And all things told, part of what the BCA did was to go and get training records from the city of Minneapolis, correct?
That's correct.
Through search warrants.
Yes, sir.
And there were multiple search warrants to obtain that type of information, right?
Yes, sir.
And there were 2 search warrants executed on the Mercedes-Benz driven by Mr. Floyd, correct?
Yes, sir.
There were 2 consent to searches of Squad 320, correct?
Yes, sir.
Now I want to just be very clear about something. When you talk about the second search of the Squad 320,
Yes.
you prior to that the defense request to view, right?
Yes.
Squad 320 had been in the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension secure storage from effectively May 25th, 26th, all the way until January when that was done, right?
Yes, not on site at our headquarters.
Right, at the secure storage location.
Correct.
And the defense would not have had access to that unless you or another representative of the BCA was present, correct?
That is correct.
And it is common, is it not, in your investigations for defense attorneys to ask to view pieces of evidence, right?
Yes, it is.
And it's permissible.
Yes.
And that was done in this particular case, right?
Yes, it was.
And you weren't present at that. That was Agent Phil, I believe, that was present,
Correct.
along with Scott Mueller.
Correct.
And I just want to make sure you're not suggesting that the defense in somehow put pieces of pills into that squad car.
No, sir, I'm not suggesting that.
And in fact, it would have been the agents who were present to cut the seal on the squad car, correct?
Yes.
All right. And the defense isn't necessarily allowed to touch or manipulate or do anything to that squad car.
That is correct.
All right. So part of the overall investigation, again, included getting surveillance videos from area businesses, right?
Correct.
Including the speedway across the street.
Yes, sir.
And some of the video is of higher quality than others, right?
That is correct.
And then also identifying people who were present and obtaining cell phones of those, right?
Correct.
And just lots and lots and lots of stuff that happens.
Yes, sir.
Right. Ultimately, when you first got involved in this case as the lead case agent, you had a very limited piece of information, right?
Yes, sir.
That was information that was gleaned from the dispatch. It was gleaned from, just basic, what's called public safety reporting, correct?
Correct.
An individual had been detained, that individual passed away, and you began the normal critical incident process, agreed?
That is correct.
Which includes securing the scene, right?
Yes.
It includes securing potential evidence, correct?
Yes, sir.
And it includes interviewing witnesses.
That's correct.
All right. And the critical incident policies of the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension were followed in this particular case, right?
Yes, sir.
Now, when you conducted the first search of the Mercedes-Benz back on May 26th of 2020, you were present when that happened, right?
From some of the time.
Right. But another crime scene team analyst would have taken photographs, looked at things, and preserved that both digitally by way of photographs, plus keeping the actual evidence, right?
Yes, a BCA agent took the photographs.
That's Mackenzie Anderson?
No, that was Special Agent Joseph O'Brien.
Right. He was also a part of the crime scene team.
Yes, sir.
And so, again, your job is to investigate the case, right?
Yes, sir.
And so, did you review those photographs
Yes, I
at that
did.
time? Did you specifically take note at that time of the presence of pills in the Mercedes-Benz?
Out of the 750 photos that I reviewed, I did not.
Okay. And so, it's not that you didn't preserve the evidence, you just didn't notice it.
Correct.
And again, based on what you had learned about what happened in this case, you weren't necessarily looking for anything of that nature, right?
Correct.
Because ultimately, whether it was relevant or not relevant was to be determined, right?
Yes, sir.
And you testified that you did watch all of the body camera footage?
Yes, sir.
But initially, other agents, because in terms of the body camera footage in this case, you would agree that it's extensive.
Very much so.
In the sense of, after this incident, something like 8 or 10 Minneapolis police officers were on scene, right?
Correct.
They were securing the scene from roughly, 9 o'clock in the evening until 3 o'clock in the morning, right?
Correct.
And all of those Minneapolis police officers, pursuant to policy, had body-worn cameras on.
That is correct.
So roughly 5 to 6 hours of body-worn camera footage for all of those.
Approximately.
And and then there's all of the video, the surveillance video. It takes a lot of time to do this, right?
Yes, sir.
And this investigation would be different than a lot of other investigations, wouldn't it? In terms of the officer involved uses of force.
In what way, sir?
Well, this investigation was occurring simultaneously to a court process, was it not?
Yes, sir.
Normally, an investigation is completed, and then it's submitted to some prosecuting organization, and they review it, and they make determinations, right?
Correct.
And that is, of all of the officer, or the majority of the officer-involved incidents that you've been involved with, how it's commonly occurred, right?
Yes, sir.
And so, in this particular case, things were unusual because of that.
That is correct.
Right? And so, information in May or June was not known until November, December, January, etc.
That's correct.
And so there has been sort of a changing dynamic in terms of the investigation.
Correct.
In terms of the videos that you have watched, you did testify that you watched the drag and walk video.
Yes.
We need to sort out some exhibit number stuff on that real quick. But I want to bring your attention back to, I think this is Exhibit 122. And I'm going to, if we could publish, Your Honor, I'm going to start for the record at 20:25:59. and I'm going to ask you to watch. 20, 25, 59. One. It's the King one you just showed. 122 is this? 127. Yep. Sorry, I don't have my notebook.
Did you say 122?
127.
127.
And permission to publish.
You in?
I'm going to ask you, sir, to watch when Officer Chauvin stands up. I'm going to ask you to watch Mr. Floyd's left, what would be his left arm, okay?
Yes, sir.
Oh, sorry. So we'll start for the record at 20:26:03.
What is that? What do you think that is? You say you call what he doing okay? You call what he doing okay? You call what he doing okay? Bro, the firefighter. Bro, you call that's okay. Check his pulse. Check his pulse.
I'm sorry, I'm at the wrong spot. Maybe take this down. I apologize, Your Honor. I had the wrong exhibit pulled up. All right, sorry, it is the right exhibit, exhibit 127, and I have it at 20, 28, and 32. So I'm going to ask you again, sir, to just watch the left arm of Mr. Floyd on the left side of the screen.
On the left side, okay. So are you referring to the body-worn camera side or the
Body-worn camera side.
Okay.
Yes, please. Did you observe Mr. Floyd's left arm on the ground underneath Mr. Chauvin's right knee?
I believe I did, yes.
And when Mr. Chauvin stood up, Mr. Floyd's arm sort of came up, right?
Could I see that again, please?
Sure. I'm going to just hit back 10 seconds and start. It's hard because of this bar. Let's try one more time. And
I have kind of a glare as well.
Pardon?
You can stand up. Can you see that?
So what was the question? Repeat the question, please.
Do you observe Mr. Chauvin's right knee to be compressing Mr. Floyd's left arm?
So clarification, I think from what I see here, it was Mr. Chauvin's shin that was compressed in the arm, and the knee was actually on the back.
That's what you believe you see?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And, but nevertheless, Mr. Floyd's left arm, the tricep area, was in between Mr. Chauvin's either knee or shin, right?
Yes.
Did you review and study the body-worn cameras like very closely yourself?
I've seen all of them. I've reviewed most of them closely, yes.
Okay. And did you attempt to understand and hear what various parties were saying at various times?
Yes.
Did you ever hear Mr. Floyd say I ate too many drugs?
No.
Like to publish Exhibit 1007, and I'm going to ask you, sir, to listen to Mr. Floyd's voice. Did you hear that?
Yes, I did.
Did it appear that Mr. Floyd said, I ate too many drugs?
Yes, it did.
In the videos that we watched, both on direct examination and we've seen throughout the course of this case, there appears to be a liquid forming underneath the vehicle, correct?
Yes.
And that liquid stream goes out into the street towards the curb behind the back of the squad car, correct?
That's correct.
And it's fair to say that liquid coming from underneath the vehicle appears to be coming from underneath the vehicle, correct?
That is correct.
And depending upon your perspective, correct, that appears that could have been urine coming from the body of Mr. Floyd.
Yes, sir.
But we can see, based on this, that was actually probably condensation from the running squad car, correct?
Yes, sir.
And that's common when a squad car is running air conditioning or whatnot, right? Condensation drips from the bottom of the muffler or exhaust system.
Yes, sir.
And you would agree that that's what that trail of liquid appears to be?
Yes, sir.
I have nothing further subject to the discussion we need to have about an exhibit.
Mr. Frank.
Agent Reyerson, with the hybrid, would the figure out the way to say this right? Can the air conditioning run with just the battery and not the gas engine?
Yes, it would.
And you were asked to look at a very short clip of a body-worn camera and ask, I assume for the first time, what Mr. Floyd was saying there.
Yes, sir.
Were you played before that? What questions were asked or things said by the officers before Mr. Floyd says that?
I don't recall right now.
It wasn't part of that video, was it, what occurred beforehand?
No.
Ever had to listen to that piece of audio and try and figure out what Mr. Floyd was saying?
I have not, no.
And so that was an exercise that Mr. Nelson asked you to do for the first time sitting there,
Yes, sir.
without reviewing the conversation beforehand.
Yes, sir.
You were asked about the moment where it appears Mr. Chauvin's right knee is on Mr. Floyd's back just before he gets up.
Yes.
In that, did you notice whether Mr. Floyd's shirt moved?
Yes, it appeared to move
From what?
from Mr. Chauvin's knee.
You were asked to describe this as an unusual case because the investigation kept going on while there was a court process.
Yes.
Is it the typical process then when you investigate a case to hand it over and then be done with it and never work on it again?
No.
When you turn over an investigation, is it common to continue working on that investigation throughout the court process?
Yes.
Have you ever in your career conducting investigations said to a charging authority, sorry, my work's done on the case, I'm not going to work on this any further?
No.
In fact, some of the ongoing investigation that you did was essentially at the request of the defense attorneys.
That is correct.
And I'm referring, just to be clear, I don't want to misrepresent anything, but based on the defense attorneys seeing that pill in the vehicle.
Correct.
I think what Mr. Nelson was asking was, you're not saying in any way that they put that pill there.
No.
That's all I have here.
Anything further?
Are you a car mechanic?
No, sir.
Do you have a hybrid vehicle?
No, sir.
You understand that this squad car has both an engine, like an internal combustion engine that runs on gasoline, and a battery, correct?
Yes, sir.
And so whether the vehicle was running on the battery or the gas engine on May 25th, 2020, you would have no way of knowing, correct?
Correct.
No further questions.
All right. Should we give everyone a 10-minute break so we can discuss this issue, or?
If you don't mind, Your Honor, I'd like
All right. Members of the jury, we're going to give you a 10-minute break while we discuss a different legal issue. If you could just remain at this point. I'm not sure if this is all to you, but did you know that Silas and go swap it out for All right, be seated. Is this just for you to privately hash out something, or?
We just have to figure out which, there's a switch in the unit numbers compared to not so careless.
All right. Once you're, if you could work with Mr. Schaefer on that. Also, 1007 is. Separate exhibit, although it is part of another one. We had not shown as received, but both parties agreed it was offered and received earlier. Is that right? I'm just asking for a status.
But I don't know if it was offered.
I would offer 1007.
Any objection to 1007? 1007 is formally received. All right, you guys, let's circle back at 2:30. done. All right, be seated, please. Hey, members of the jury, I think we have things sorted out just for your information. We'll take another break later, but it'll probably be like 10 minutes. But for now, Mr. Frank.
Thank you, Your Honor. And thank you, everybody, for your patience. Your Honor, we are recalling Agent Reyerson for actually two matters. One is to readdress the Exhibit 1007 clip that was played, and to put context in the short video that was shown as Exhibit 107. Agent Reyerson, while we were on a break, did you have an opportunity to review Exhibit 127, which is the composite with King's body-worn camera, correct?
Yes.
During that same time period?
Yes.
And prior to the short clip of Lane's body camera that you were shown as Exhibit 1007, is there a discussion about drug use by the officers and attempting to speak to Mr. Floyd?
Yes.
And hearing that section of the audio, did that help you to understand what Mr. Floyd might have been saying that you were asked about by counsel?
Yes.
And, Your Honor, then we would ask to play 127, Exhibit 127, which is queued up to 2020-30 through 2021-01, where that phrase appears that Mr. Reyerson, Agent Reyerson, was asked about.
Please understand. No. Please, man, I can't breathe.
Get up on the sidewalk, please. One side or the other, please.
My face getting bad.
Here, should we get his legs up?
Oh my God.
Nope, just leave him.
Oh
Just
my
leave him.
God.
Leave him. Yep, just leave him.
All right.
I'm dead.
The park's still sitting on the car.
Oh. Look at my face, man.
I'm assuming so.
I believe so. We found a pipe.
Get out of the car.
Yeah, he was right.
I hate
He
you,
wasn't
Mr.
following
Reyerson.
instructions.
Please,
Yeah, across the street, park's watching.
please,
Two other people with
please,
him.
I can't breathe.
So the record should reflect that we've played through 2021-10 with the quote that you were asked about appearing really at 2021-01, correct?
Yes.
Having heard it in context, are you able to tell what Mr. Floyd is saying there?
Yes, I believe Mr. Floyd was saying, I ain't do no drugs.
So it's a little different than what you were asked about when you only saw a portion of the video, correct?
Yes, sir.
And then to clarify what we did earlier, it would appear that I had inverted a couple of the exhibit numbers, correct?
Yes.
We've now straightened that out. Exhibits 53 and 54 are both parts of the Dragon Walk video. You have seen those, and they are, in fact, what was obtained from the Dragon Walk, correct?
Correct.
And also Exhibit 55, is that a portion of the Dragon Walk video as well?
Yes.
And so, Your Honor, just to be clear, what we had initially offered as Exhibit 54 should actually be Exhibit 53. And we will, for clarity, offer Exhibits 53, 54, and 55.
Any objection to any of those? 53, 54, and 55 are received.
I don't intend to publish them at this time, Your Honor.
Okay. Anything that was not received is received, and go ahead and publish. Which one are you going to publish?
We are not going to publish them.
Not going to. Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Frank, the mask. Your Honor, I am requesting permission to publish a portion of Exhibit 55. Agent Reyerson, you have had an opportunity to review the Dragon Walk surveillance video,
Yes, sir.
and there are portions of the video where Mr. Floyd is present, correct?
Yes, sir.
And it shows various interactions, but after Mr. Floyd leaves, there are interactions between other people walking past. The camera continues to run the same perspective.
Correct.
Your Honor, I would ask for permission to publish Exhibit 55 starting at the timestamp 203848. And Agent Reyerson, I'm going to ask you to watch the area of the vehicles and the passengers in the vehicles.
Yes, sir.
Were you able to see?
Yes, sir.
What does it appear that individual does?
The individual in the red hat you're referring to?
Yes.
Appears as though he throws something.
So he's looking initially through the passenger or through the vehicle, looking in the area of the police officers, correct?
Appeared that way.
It appears that he then reaches into his backpack and retrieves something,
Yes.
and it appears that he then throws it off to his right shoulder, right?
That's correct.
And it appeared to go some distance away.
Yes, sir.
Would that be consistent with someone trying to get rid of something that they don't want the police to find?
Could be, yes.
I have no further questions.
Anything further? All right. Thank you, Agent. You are excused from your subpoena. Thank you.
The state will call Mackenzie Anderson to the stand.
Raise your right hand. You swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth and nothing but the truth.
I do.
See, please. And if you use this, just to legalize it. And if you would not mind, we'd like to have you remove your mask for testimony. And if you could begin by giving us your full name, spelling each of your names.
Mackenzie Anderson, McKenzie
Mr. Frank.
Thank you, Your Honor. And can you tell us how you're currently employed?
I work for the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension in the Forensic Science Laboratory.
So you are a scientist, a forensic scientist?
I'm a forensic scientist, yes.
Can you describe for the jurors your educational background to be a forensic scientist?
I have a bachelor's degree in forensic science from the University of North Dakota, and I have a master's of forensic science degree from George Washington University.
So when did you achieve your bachelor's of science degree in forensic science?
2007,
And where from?
University of North Dakota.
I've said that already. And so you worked on a master's degree as well.
Yes,
Where did you get that from? George Washington?
George Washington,
And what year was that?
2009.
So what kinds of things do you have to do to get a master's in forensic science?
The coursework included criminal justice coursework, law courses. There was a lot of hands-on application of forensic practices, and my concentration was in forensic molecular biology. So there was a lot of coursework dedicated to DNA testing.
And after After you achieved your bachelor's degree in forensic science and working on your master's, did you begin working in the field as well?
Yes.
Where did you initially start working in the field?
I initially started working at a lab called Bca Technology that was out in Virginia. It was a private forensic laboratory, and I did DNA testing while there.
Prior to that, did you have some experience with the BCA?
Prior to that, I was an intern at the BCA between my first and second year of graduate school.
And what kind of work did you do during your internship?
I did projects with our latent print section and also with the mitochondrial DNA section. They had to do with validating a new instrument that they were using at the time.
So then you went to work at Bca Technology, which is BODE, correct?
Correct.
And what did you do there?
I started out working in their group called Customized Casework. I did a lot of technician work for them. After that, I moved to a role in their databasing unit. So I did convicted offender samples from a variety of states who contracted with that lab.
And so at some point, did you leave that lab, obviously?
Yes.
Where did you go?
I started at the BCA in 2009, in October of 2009.
And what job did you take at the BCA?
I was hired on as a forensic scientist in the biology section.
And what does the biology section do?
The biology section does DNA testing and also body fluid identification, which is the identification of bodily fluids as it's relevant to a case, and including sample collection from a variety of physical items of evidence that come into the lab for DNA testing.
So when did you start doing that?
I was hired in October of 2009.
When you get that job for the BCA, was there some specific training that made you go through because you were hired by the BCA?
Yes.
Can you describe that for the jury?
So the DNA training program takes about a year to complete. It starts with, typically people will start with that body fluid identification portion first. They'll get trained in that, and then they'll move on to DNA testing. So all of that training includes watching other scientists do their work, many practice samples, competency sets that we need to do. We do written tests, oral tests before we are signed off and able to work independently and issue our own reports.
So are you still working in the biology section?
Yes.
And at some point, did you take on additional responsibilities at the BCA?
Yes. In 2014, I joined our crime scene team.
And have you been working on a crime scene team since then?
Yes.
At some point, did you become a crime scene team leader?
Yes, I did, in 2016.
And we'll come back to that in a little bit. Are you a member of any professional organizations or affiliations?
I am. I am a member of the Midwest Association of Forensic Scientists and also the American Academy of Forensic Sciences.
And so we've heard a little bit about the BCA, the different divisions they have. You're in the laboratory division, correct?
Correct.
Can you just describe for the jurors, what all the laboratory does? Not in any great detail necessarily, but just to give an overview of what it does.
The laboratory has a number of different sections that processes different types of evidence. These sections include DNA, drug chemistry, latent prints, firearms, toxicology. So depending on what the item of evidence is, it gets routed to the appropriate section of the lab. Sometimes there are item of evidence items that we work on in multiple sections of the lab. So it just kind of depends on what the request is and what the item of evidence is that we're working on.
And is the crime scene team considered a separate section?
Yes.
Do you know how many crime scene teams there are?
We have two main crime scene teams. We have a team down in St. Paul at our BCA headquarters, and then we have a second team up in our regional lab in Bemidji.
And so when did you started working on a crime scene team in approximately, what did you say, 2014?
Yes,
And you became a team leader in 2016?
correct.
Is there something you need to do to become a crime scene team leader?
Yes, in order to join the crime scene team initially, there is a lot of training that we go through at the lab that includes lectures and presentations and hands-on practical exercises, oral boards in order to join the team. To become a team leader, there is some additional training that we go through, specifically that covers shooting scene reconstruction and bloodstain pattern analysis, which again comes with its own tests and oral boards before we're able to issue reports in those sections.
So as you are working there now, you're in both sections, the crime scene team and the biology or DNA section?
That's correct.
And so when you're on a crime scene team, how do you generally get called out on a particular case?
So we are on call on a rotational basis, but we're on call for a week at a time. So when we're on call, we're available 24/7 to respond to a potential crime scene. And our requests come in from an agent who will call me and kind of give me a synopsis or a rundown of the case that they have and the request that they have for us to come out. And if it meets our criteria, I will send out word to the rest of the crime scene team that we need to respond.
Any idea, well, let's look at like the last year, how many crime scenes you've been to?
Last year, I responded to about 30 crime scenes.
Like last calendar year?
Yes.
Has that sort of been a typical year?
That was more than normal.
Is the lab, the BCA lab, accredited?
Yes, we are.
Can you describe to the jury what that means to be accredited?
Accreditation is a process in which trained auditors and assessors and other scientists who work in the field come into our lab and do an independent assessment on our entire quality system and all of our laboratory sections. They evaluate us on hundreds of criteria to make sure that we are qualified to perform the testing that we do.
And do you know how long the lab has been accredited?
We have been accredited since the 90s, since 1994.
Over time, different accrediting boards?
Yes, that's correct.
And have you gone through the accreditation process?
Yes, I have been employed while we have gone through many accreditation cycles.
So it's a fancy way of saying your work gets checked by other professionals.
Essentially, yes.
Does the lab also perform audits of other labs for their accreditation?
Yes, we do.
And were you called to a scene on May 25th of 2020?
Yes, I was.
And how did you get called out? Do you remember how that call came to you?
I received a phone call from Assistant Special Agent in Charge Mike Phil around 11:30 on the night of May 25th, 2020. And he requested crime scene assistance to a scene in South Minneapolis.
And did you in fact then respond?
Yes.
And can you tell the jurors who all was on the crime scene team that night?
Our team, typically it consists of a team leader, a team member, a technician, and then a photographer who is a special agent at the BCA. For this particular scene, I responded with myself and the technician. I opted to not go with the member initially and just let him know that we might need him if more information came to light, but initially I just responded to the scene with myself, the technician, and our photographer.
And so when you get this call, you gather them together and head to that scene, correct?
Yes, the laboratory scientists on the crime scene team, we respond to the headquarters in St. Paul, so then we can grab our crime scene truck and then we all respond to the scene together.
So that crime scene truck has all your equipment and stuff you need.
Yes.
And what we sometimes see on TV at a crime scene, like almost an RV.
Yes, exactly.
And do you recall going to the scene then in Minneapolis because of this?
Yes.
And do you recall what time it was that you arrived on scene?
We arrived on scene, it was about 1:15, so early in the morning on the 26th.
And do you recall how long you were at that scene?
We were there for a little over 2 hours.
And that location in Minneapolis, do you remember the intersection?
Yes, it was at the intersection of Chicago Avenue and East 38th Street.
And when you get there, what's sort of the first step in the process?
When the team arrives, we get a briefing from the agent on scene.
And what kind of information did you learn at that point?
The briefing that we got included that an employee of the Cup Foods restaurant called 911 when they suspected someone was using what they thought could be counterfeit money. Minneapolis police officers arrived to the scene. They attempted to arrest Mr. Floyd. There was perhaps a little bit of a struggle to get him into the back seat of the squad car. Eventually he was moved to the ground. At some point, Mr. Floyd became unresponsive and was then taken by ambulance to HCMC.
So that's the information you were given about why this was a scene.
Yes.
And from there then, did you proceed to process that area?
Yes.
And can you describe, when you first arrive, what you see as that scene in general?
When we first arrived, we saw at that intersection that there was 2 vehicles that were parked on East 38th Street. There was a Mercedes-Benz SUV and a Minneapolis squad car parked behind it on 38th Street by Dragon Walk Restaurant. Other than that, there wasn't a whole lot else that was around at the time. It was raining when we got there, and from my quick walkthrough that we do with the agents, I didn't necessarily see a lot of processing that was potentially going to be needed at that particular scene.
And at some point where you're at the scene, did you become aware that there had been a video taken of the incident?
Yes, after we had been on scene for a little while, I was made aware of a video.
Did you watch a portion of that video?
I did watch just a small portion of it.
And did that help you try and locate areas that might be of interest?
Yes, the primary reason for watching it was because we didn't know exactly where the incident had occurred. The assumption was when we got there was it happened where the squad car was parked, but by watching the video we could see that it was actually around the corner on Chicago Avenue. So the objective of me watching the video was to see where Mr. Floyd could have been on the street, so I could specifically look at that part of the street.
And did you?
Yes.
Did you see anything there?
No, I did not.
Now, as part of the process to take photographs of the scene.
Yes.
And did you in fact take a number of photographs of the scene?
Yes, the special agent who was with me took a number of photographs on scene.
And would those photographs help you describe to the jury what you saw at the scene that night?
Yes.
And have we shown you previously what have been marked as exhibits 129 through 135?
Yes.
And do those appear to be photographs taken that night of the scene?
Yes.
Your Honor, we would offer 129 through 135.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
129 through 135 inclusive are received.
And then we'll publish 129, please. Can you describe for the jurors what's depicted in this photograph?
In Exhibit 129, this is a photograph of the photographer is standing on Chicago Avenue, facing south. That cross street that you see is East 38th Street. Cup Foods is on the left on the intersection, and then just beyond that, you can see a portion of the Minneapolis squad car.
And there's appears to be what we call crime scene tape, correct?
Yes, the crime scene tape was up prior to the arrival of the crime scene team.
And moving to Exhibit 130. describe this, please.
This is a photograph taken again from Chicago Avenue looking north, and it's another view of Cup Foods.
And Exhibit 131.
131 is a photograph from 38th Street looking east. This is a view of the Mercedes-Benz SUV and also the squad car parked behind it.
And does this photograph also show some of the crime scene tape?
Yes, it does.
And there's a stylus in front of you if you want to just point it out to the jurors on the screen.
There's crime scene tape running along in front of the SUV, and then there is a little bit of crime scene tape further down the block as well.
And did the crime scene tape, appear to be appropriate for securing that scene?
Yes, I thought so.
Did it, in fact, essentially encircle that intersection?
Yes, it did.
So we'll go to Exhibit 132. And describe this for the jurors as well. And if you could also just point out the crime scene tape here.
Sure. This is a photo on East 38th Street again. This view is looking west, and it shows the Mercedes-Benz in the foreground, the Minneapolis squad car parked behind it. There's crime scene tape behind the squad, and then a little bit further down on the other side of the intersection as well.
And when you are well, let's go to Exhibit 133 then as well. Do you see this? Can you describe this for the jurors, please?
Exhibit 133 is a photo taken across the street from where that other photo was that we just saw. This is on the same sidewalk as Cup Foods. That red awning belongs to Cup Foods. And this is again looking west on 38th Street.
When you're at a crime scene, particularly one out of doors like this, do you also try and locate security cameras?
Yes, that is part of what we do.
And in this photograph here, Exhibit 133, do we see some security cameras that you spotted while you were there?
Yes, there are a couple couple security cameras. Do you want me to circle them?
Sure. And so that's just customary to take note of those for investigative purposes.
It is.
I'm going to ask to back up to 132, please. And this is where we're seeing the other side of the street by the Dragon Walk, correct?
Yes.
Is there a security camera in this photograph as well?
Oh, yes, sorry. There is this one on Dragon Walk on the corner.
And then going to Exhibit 134, can you describe this for the jurors as well?
This is a photograph taken from Chicago Avenue, slightly closer to Cup Foods. Cup Foods is that building on the left. And then you can also see Squad 320 in full view on the other side of 38th Street.
So the crime scene tape was almost redundant in some areas, right?
It was a little, yes.
And then are there security cameras visible in this photograph as well?
Yes, you can see the one on Dragon Walk and the one underneath the awning of Cup Foods.
So now if we go to Exhibit 135, is there a better view of that?
Yes, Exhibit 135 is a photo specifically of the security camera underneath the awning of Cup Foods.
And when you take that down. When you're out there, you make note of those security cameras for investigators.
Yes.
When you were at the scene, did you notice any blood at the scene?
No, I searched the street around where the squad car was parked, the street down the sidewalk, and then also the street and the sidewalk where, when we had watched the video, where the approximate location that we thought he could have been, and I did not see any blood.
But you understood that it had rained since the event, correct?
Yes,
And that could have interfered with the scene.
it could have.
And then you noted the two vehicles present. Other than those two vehicles, did you collect any evidence from the scene?
No, there was no evidence collected from the scene.
And what was decided about what to do with the vehicles?
It was decided that both of the vehicles would be towed back to the BCA for further processing.
Why would you process them at the garage rather than out there?
It's a common practice for us to tow vehicles back to the BCA. It's so we can process them in a more controlled environment with better lighting. We're not out there in the dark, in the rain, and we can do it in a controlled setting with all of the equipment that we need around.
And so were those vehicles in fact towed from the scene?
They were.
And were you present when that was done?
Yes.
And Agent Reyerson was involved in that process, correct?
He was.
And so then you left the scene after that at approximately 3:30 in the morning?
Yes.
So what was the next step in the process for the crime scene team then?
The next step that we did, I arranged with Agent Reyerson we agreed upon a time to process the actual vehicles. And so we agreed that we would do them on May 27th.
So that would be essentially the next day now, correct?
Yes.
Is that customary to essentially wait a day to process a vehicle?
It is.
Where were the vehicles at that time?
They both were towed to a secure garage that we have at the BCA that we use for processing vehicles.
And did you in fact then process the vehicles on May 27th?
Yes, we did.
Do you remember approximately when you started the work on those vehicles?
We started at about 9 in the morning, I'd say, processing the vehicles.
Who all was involved in processing the vehicles?
To process the vehicles, it was myself, a team member, and an agent who was taking photos for us.
And can you just describe kind of the overall process that you take when you're going to process a vehicle?
So the first step that we do is we will photograph and document the outside of the vehicle in its condition that it was when we towed it from the scene. After that, we'll open up the doors and take photographs of the interior of the vehicle as it is before anybody moves or touches anything. And then after that, we start going through the contents of the vehicle and marking items as necessary for collection.
And when you processed these vehicles, what kind of information did you have about the incident itself? Did you get any further information than when you originally were at the scene?
No, there really was very little additional information that was known at the time, so not much had changed, I guess, from my perspective, from just that day that had passed.
We saw a lot of photographs of the scene. Did you also take a lot of photographs of the vehicles?
Yes.
What's the purpose of taking that many photographs?
Just documentation purposes, so we can photograph, like I said, the condition of everything that it was prior to us doing anything or moving anything, and then as we move objects around and as we find items of evidence, we are documenting and photographing its location, the condition of the items that we're taking, just so everything is thoroughly documented and someone else can then look at the photos and get an idea of what we did.
And when you are processing a vehicle, do you always know for sure what would become an item of evidence in the future?
No, that can be said about any vehicle or any scene really that we process.
When you started the processing of these vehicles, did you know that they were going to be kept by the BCA?
Yes, I do believe I knew that the intention was always to hold on to the vehicles, yes.
So even after you process them, they're going to stay in the custody of the BCA?
Yes.
And have you looked at what we've marked as Exhibits 137 through 149?
Yes.
And do you recognize those as photographs taken during the processing of the Mercedes-Benz SUV?
Yes.
And would those photographs help you explain what you did to the jury?
Yes.
Your Honor, to offer Exhibits 137 through 149.
Any objection?
No objection.
137 through 149 are received.
So then let's go to 137, please. So is this then the Mercedes SUV that you processed on May 27th?
Yes, this is the SUV we processed, and this is the condition it was the morning that we started the processing.
And where is this location?
This is in the BCA processing garage at our headquarters in St. Paul.
Do you remember at the time you did this processing what information you had about this vehicle itself?
The information that I had that was kind of helping guide my search of the vehicle, again, was just that there was potentially some blood that could be present on either of the vehicles. The other thing that I knew about was money. The potential to have counterfeit money could be found in any of the vehicles. So I had those things in mind. Other than that, there wasn't necessarily anything specific I was looking for, just looking through to see if there's anything of note that I needed to collect forensically or investigatively.
And why did you think there might be some blood to look for?
Just because of the information that I had at the briefing and the scene, that there was a little bit of a struggle to perhaps get Mr. Floyd in the back seat of the squad car. And I had information that he could have been bleeding possibly from like the nose or mouth.
And did you have any information about whether he may have been under the influence of something?
No, I did not have that information at that time.
When you, all right, so let's go to Exhibit 138 then. And describe what's depicted here.
Exhibit 138 is a photo of the driver's seat of the vehicle with the driver's side door open.
And this is how it appeared upon first opening the SUV?
Yes, this is how it appeared when we first opened it and before anything had been moved or collected.
And then let's go to Exhibit 139. I'm sorry. We apparently haven't put those up on the screen. Can we go back to 138? And actually, I guess 137. These were not up on the screen earlier, is that correct? So again, 137 depicts the vehicle in your garage, correct?
Yes.
And then 138. Can you put that up, please? And that is the driver's side as it appeared?
Yes.
And then I think we are on 139. And this is the front passenger side?
Yes, that's correct.
Now in the center of this photograph, you'll see a blue bag or envelope. Do you see that?
Yes.
Are you familiar with what that is?
Yes.
Can you describe that for the jurors, please?
That is called a Faraday Bag. That is something that we use to put electronics in, specifically cell phones. So there was a cell phone observed on the front passenger seat of the vehicle, and that was put into that bag by our agents prior to us towing the vehicle. The purpose of that is to prevent anyone from remotely accessing a cell phone or trying to, perhaps delete data or change anything on the phone.
So it essentially just locks people out of that phone.
Yes.
And then 140, please. And again, describe this for the jurors.
This is a photo of the rear passenger side of the SUV.
And Exhibit 141. Can you describe that for the jurors, please?
This is a photo of the trunk area of the SUV with the liftgate open.
And then going to Exhibit 142. Can you describe what's depicted in this photograph?
This is a photo that is of the front passenger seat area of the vehicle, a little closer in. You can see a portion of the floor of the seat and also the center console.
In the center console, there appears to be a small white, looks like a pill, correct?
Yes, next to the gum, there is a small white pill.
When this photograph was taken, did you have any knowledge that the case involved anything with pills?
No, not at all.
And so then you preserve this area by taking photographs of it all, correct?
Correct.
And that becomes part of the investigative file, the photographs?
Yes.
And after the vehicle is fully processed, what's the process that you go through with it?
After everything is photographed, at that point, then I start marking items for evidence collection by putting down item tenths or an item number, and then those items are re-photographed after I mark them.
And in fact, during this search, did you remove some money from the vehicle?
Yes, I did.
Where was that money located?
Money was located there was one bill on the front passenger seat, and the other bills were in the gap between the front passenger seat and the center console.
And can you show the jurors kind of in this photograph 142 where that would be?
It was in this gap, but a little bit further back,
Were
next
they,
to the seat.
I'm sorry, were they easily visible there, or
No, you can't see it here.
were they kind of stuffed down in between?
They were.
And have you also seen what we've marked as Exhibit 136?
Yes.
And is that a photograph that was taken at the end of, well, after the vehicle had been processed?
Yes.
Your Honor, we'd offer 136.
Any objection?
No objection.
So let's publish 136, please. I've gone out of order, Your Honor, I know.
I'm seeing it. It's received.
Okay, thank you. That's how this works. So 136, you see the vehicle here.
Yes.
And there appears to be some red tape on the door areas. Can you explain that to the jury?
Yes. Once we were done processing the vehicle, all of the doors were tape sealed and initialed, like you can see there.
And why is that done?
We do that to preserve the item of evidence and to ensure that no one enters the car, and if someone has, it would be obvious and that the tape seal is broken.
And then where is the SUV taken after that?
The SUV is towed to a secure storage facility.
Now, with regard to this blue SUV, were you asked to search that again later?
I was.
And do you recall when that was that you did that?
I searched the vehicle for a second time on December 9th of 2020.
And do you recall why that was done?
Special Agent Reyerson had relayed to me that there was a request from the Attorney General's office to collect additional items from the SUV.
And so did you then, well, did you have were you given specific information about what to recover from the vehicle?
Yes, I was given specific things to look for.
And what was that?
I was told to collect Suboxone, pills in the center console, gum, if there was any gum present, and money. And then also there was a request to photograph some of the contents of the luggage in the trunk.
And have you seen what we've marked as exhibits 143 through 149?
Yes.
And are those photographs taken during the second processing of the SUV?
Yes.
Your Honor, to offer 143 through 149?
If not received before, they are received now.
Yeah, they are, I'm sorry. Duplicating efforts. And so showing you exhibit 143 again, please. We're showing you 143. And is this photograph, can we publish this as well, Your Honor? Is this photograph taken during the second processing of the vehicle?
Yes, it was.
And were the seals intact when you began that?
All of the seals were intact on the vehicle.
And so what are we seeing here on this evidence tape? What is the handwriting?
The handwriting is initials CM. That's one of our agents. And then the date that it was tape sealed up initially, so 5/27/2020.
And did you then break those seals and begin a secondary processing of that?
Yes.
And I'd like to move then to Exhibit 144. And can you describe what's depicted in this photograph?
In this photograph, you can see inside the front driver's side of the SUV, and there is an item of evidence that has been marked with that 46 item tent.
And so why do you do that?
Every item that we collect in a case gets its own unique item number, so that way we can track it through the lab and the chain of custody after that point when it's collected.
All right. So let's proceed then to Exhibit 145. And is this now a close-up of item 46?
Yes, this is a close-up of item 46. It was a Suboxone packet that was opened on the driver's side floor.
And are you familiar generally with what Suboxone is?
Generally, a little bit.
What is it?
It is a prescription medication used for adults with an opioid addiction.
And so was this item recovered by you?
Yes.
And then if we could go to Exhibit 146. Can you describe what's in this photograph, please?
In this photograph is an item of evidence that has been marked as item 47, which is on the front driver's seat.
And if we can go to Exhibit 147. Is this then a close-up of item 47?
Yes, this is a close-up of item 47, which was an unopened packet of Suboxone on the driver's seat.
And can we then proceed to Exhibit 148? Describe what's depicted in this photograph.
In Exhibit 148, there is an item of evidence marked as BCA Item 48, and that is referring to the 2 pills that you can see there in the center console.
And appears to be the same kind of pill we saw in the previous photograph from the first processing of the vehicle, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And so were these the pills that you were specifically asked to retrieve from the vehicle?
Yes, they were.
And did you in fact take those 2 pills?
I did.
And if we could go to 149, how many pills did you find there?
There were 2 pills in the center console.
And did you recover them both as item 48?
Yes, both of them were collected together as item 48.
So why collect them together?
Because they were in close proximity, like you can see there, and they both had the same markings on them as well.
And what did you do with those after you recovered them from the vehicle?
After they're recovered from the vehicle, they're packaged up by myself. They're tape sealed in a package, and they're given a BCA barcode, so then I can transfer it to the appropriate section of the lab for testing.
And so was that done? Were they made available to another section of the lab?
Yes, they were sent to our drug chemistry section.
And I understand you did some other work in processing the vehicle at that time, but nothing of additional evidentiary value removed from the vehicle at that time.
Correct.
And now, going back to the initial processing on May 27th, did you also process Squad 320 on that day?
Yes.
And I would ask you if you have looked at exhibits, well, let's just start with Exhibit 150. And is that a photograph taken from the processing of the squad car?
Yes.
You're going to offer Exhibit 150.
150 is received.
So if we could look at Exhibit 150, can you describe that for the jurors, please?
Exhibit 150 is a photograph of Minneapolis squad car number 320. This is the condition as it was towed from the scene, and also the morning of the 27th when we began processing on it.
And this is in the BCA garage.
It is.
So I'm now going to offer, Your Honor, Exhibits 152 through 169.
Any objection?
No objection to those, Your Honor.
Exhibits 152 through 169 inclusive are received.
So we'll skip over 150 and go to 151 and go to 152, please. Can you describe what's depicted in this photograph for the jurors?
In Exhibit 152, this photograph is of the front driver's side area of the squad car with the door open.
And you had some information about a struggle when they were trying to get Mr. Floyd into the squad car, correct?
Yes.
So why take a photograph of the front driver's side?
When we're processing a vehicle, we document all of it, regardless of the circumstances. We just will photographically document everything about the vehicle before we start processing it.
So if we go to 153 now, please. And this is a photograph of what?
This is a photograph of the driver's side door, like the pocket on the door.
And so when you have this photograph taken, do you have any knowledge that these items have anything to do with the case?
No,
But just to document, you take this photograph.
exactly.
And Exhibit 154, what is this?
Exhibit 154 is a closer photo of the driver's side floor of the squad.
And again, just to document the scene.
Yes.
And 155, describe this for the jurors, please.
This is a photograph of the contents of the front passenger side pocket on the door.
And 156,
This is a photograph of the front passenger seat of the squad.
and so again, these are just taken to document for future reference if needed.
Yes.
Now I'd like to show you Exhibit 157. And can you describe for the jurors what's depicted in this photograph?
In Exhibit 157, this is a photograph of the rear driver's side of the squad. You can see a little bit of the rear driver's side seat and then the interior of the rear driver's side door.
Is this, well, prior to this, had you processed other police squad cars?
Yes.
I assume as an adult you've sat in the back seat of regular cars before?
Yes.
The back seat of a squad car here a little bit different than the typical vehicle?
Yes.
How so?
The back seat, you can kind of see the cage, the glass that separates the front of the vehicle from the rear of the vehicle, and all of the plastic that's up on the back side of the seats. The back seat itself is also rubber, and yeah, they're just a little bit different looking, obviously, than a regular vehicle. There's isn't cloth seats or anything like that.
So if we go to Exhibit 158, this is a view into the back seat of the squad car, correct?
Yes.
And that's how it looked as you began processing that vehicle on May 27th.
Yes, it is.
And fair to say that the back seat area is a lot smaller in a squad car than it is in a regular passenger car like this?
Yes.
And showing you Exhibit 159 then. This a view of the back seat from the other side, the passenger side?
Yes, this is a perspective from the passenger side, the rear passenger side of the squad.
And Exhibit 160 as well.
This is a photo of the back seat taken from the perspective, again, of the rear passenger side of the vehicle.
Now there appears to be a strap item on the back seat. Do you see that?
Yes, there was a black strap on the rear passenger seat.
And there appears to be a shoe on the floor, correct?
Yes, there was a pair of shoes on the floor. In this particular photo, you can see the right shoe. The left shoe is on the other side.
On the floor of the other side?
Yes.
And Exhibit 161. Now this is a closer up photo of the right shoe on the passenger side, correct?
Correct.
And again, just documenting the location of that shoe.
Yes.
Now, if we can go to Exhibit 162, what does this depict?
This is a photograph of the trunk area of the squad. That was a large removable plastic tote that had various items and supplies in it.
And again, didn't have any specific information that this area of the squad car was involved in the incident, did you?
No, we did not.
But you still document this?
Yes.
So I think what we can do is just kind of scroll through Exhibits 163 through 166, please. So each of those photographs depicts the stuff that was in the back seat of the squad car, correct?
That's correct.
And that's done again just to document what's there.
Yes.
And were certain items then, I think you can take it down, please, documented by you and recovered?
Yes.
And did that include the pair of shoes
Yes.
and that strap in the vehicle?
Yes.
And as well, did you see any blood stains or what appeared to be blood stains in the vehicle?
Yes, I did.
I'm going to show you Exhibit 167. Do you see that photograph? Do you
Yes.
see? Okay.
Oh, yes.
And so the strap is labeled as what item?
As item 9.
And the shoe?
The shoe is item 8.
And were both shoes collected?
Yes.
And going to Exhibit 168, this is a close-up of that shoe, correct?
Correct.
And was that shoe removed?
Yes, it was.
And did you in fact remove it?
I did, yes.
And did it have any apparent blood on it?
No, blood was not noted on it.
And Exhibit 169? And just describe for us, first of all, the shoe is missing, correct?
Correct.
So this photograph was taken after you removed it?
Yes.
And there appears to be a white spot on the floor here on the passenger side, correct?
Yes.
And if you want to just maybe take the stylus and draw around it. And at the time you removed the shoe, did you notice that there?
I did see it, yes.
And did you remove it at the time?
No, I did not.
Why not?
At the time, again, I didn't have any information that I was looking for anything like a pill or resembling a pill. It was in the back seat of a squad car, so I wasn't exactly sure what it was, if it came off of somebody's shoe. So at the time, I didn't give it any forensic significance given the information I had.
And so you left it in that location?
I did.
Obviously documented it with photographs.
Yes, correct.
And when you were searching at that time, really what was sort of the focus of your forensic processing of this vehicle?
The focus of it was processing the blood in the back seat.
And so then there are some other, we see some white stickers in this photograph.
Correct.
Okay, we can come back to those later. After this initial processing, were you asked to do a subsequent processing of the squad car with relation to that apparent pill on the floor?
I was.
And do you know what sort of prompted that second processing of the vehicle?
I was informed on the morning of January 27th, 2021. I was informed by Special Agent Reyerson that the vehicle, the squad, was being towed back to BCA headquarters. They had met, some of our agents had met with defense attorneys on the case who had gone through the squad, and there was an additional request for evidence collection after that.
And that specifically was for this pill or other pill-like items in the vehicle?
Yes.
And so did you in fact then process the squad car a second time with that in mind?
Yes.
And have you seen exhibits 170 through 176?
I have.
And are those taken from the processing of that vehicle?
Yes.
Your Honor, I'd offer 170 to 176. No objection.
170 through 176 inclusive are received.
I'm going to show you now exhibit 170. When you began to process that vehicle, was it still sealed up from the initial processing?
It was not sealed up when it arrived at the garage.
Because others had already been in to look for this.
Correct, that was my understanding.
And so we're seeing in exhibit 170, this back seat area, the pill appears to be present there as well, correct?
Yes, the pill is in the position it was on May 27th.
All right, and let's go to exhibit 171. And did you assign this an item number?
Yes, I assigned it Bca Item 51.
And did you then recover that item?
I did.
Can you describe describe its condition for the jury?
The pill was round in shape, however, it had a rough textured appearance to it, and there were no visible markings on this particular pill.
Did it appear like it wasn't whole any longer?
Yes, I think that's a fair statement, yes.
And then if we can go to 172, please. So this is a close-up of that item.
Yes, it is.
And so then you collected that, and did you make that available for further testing in the lab?
I did.
And we'll come back to that in a minute too. Exhibit 173, can you describe what's depicted in that photograph?
In this photograph, you can see an item that has been marked as item 52, and that is the rear driver's side of the squad car.
And can you describe for the jurors, well, let's move on to 174, and then describe for the jurors what item 52 is.
This is a closer photograph of item 52. It was a small, irregular shaped piece that could have been a portion of a pill. It had that same kind of rough textured appearance as item 51. There was no visible markings on this particular item either.
And was that collected for testing as well?
It was.
And then going to exhibit 175. It's a little harder to see, but can you describe for the jurors what appear to be marked as items 53 and 54?
Yes, so in the background of the photo is an item marked as item 53. This was a small piece of what could have been a portion of a pill. Item 54, you'll actually see two item numbers for item 54. Everything else that looked like it could have possibly been a piece of a pill, so the small remnants and the powder that were remaining, I collected together as item 54.
And so let's go to exhibit 176, please. And is this a close-up then of item 53?
Yes, this is a close-up of item 53, which looked like it could have been a piece of a possible pill. Although it was reddish-brown in color, it was actually stuck to the kind of the seat back portion of the rear passenger seat.
Did it seem consistent with 51 or 52 or 54?
It did seem consistent, except for the color difference. It did still seem consistent with the other pieces.
And was this also retained by you and made available to the lab?
Yes.
And in fact, you had done some testing yourself on these items?
Yes.
Right, you can take it. And you had done some DNA testing on that, correct?
Yes, I did some DNA testing in this case.
Which item did you do DNA testing on?
Initially, I did my DNA testing on 8 different blood stains that were collected from the back seat of the squad. And then in that same round of DNA testing, I did collect samples from 2 of the $20 bills that were recovered from the Mercedes-Benz SUV, and I did DNA testing on those items as well.
And did you do DNA testing on item 51 that we just saw?
Yes, in a subsequent report, I did item 51 as well.
And did you do DNA testing on items 52 to 54?
No, I did not.
Why not?
They were quite small. They were fragile. Item 51 itself was also pretty fragile, so I had to collect the sample very carefully. The other ones were too small and fragile and weren't conducive for DNA testing.
So why would you attempt to do DNA testing on item 51? What were you trying to find out?
In addition to doing DNA testing on item 51, I also tested it for the presence of amylase, which is a component of your saliva. So I did that first, and it was positive. So then I went on and did DNA testing on it.
So without going into a great deal of detail about DNA testing, what's the general premise behind what we all hear about as DNA testing?
So DNA testing, in this particular case, I did nuclear DNA testing. It's the type of DNA where you get half from your mom, half from your dad. You get it in a unique combination that makes you different even than your siblings. This DNA codes for hair color, eye color, to things you can't necessarily see. It's essentially your genetic blueprint. So we do DNA testing on items of evidence from a scene, and then we will compare those to known DNA samples.
And where or in what ways can DNA be left behind for forensic testing to be done?
DNA can be left behind in a variety of ways. So through a bodily fluid, so something like saliva or blood. DNA can be left behind by touching an object or handling an object. It can be found also in the root of your hair, so it can really show up in a number of instances.
And so when you have an item like item 51, it appears to be a pill, you can test to see if there might be the presence of saliva in there.
Yes.
And would that be true even if it appears to be dry?
Yes, it would be possible to leave that behind.
And describe for the jurors how you try to determine if there is or had been saliva on an item like that.
So the pill itself, I swabbed it with 2 swabs, so they essentially look like Q-tips. I swabbed each side of the pill together. And then from those swabs, I took a small cutting of it, and then I used that small cutting of the swab and tested it with a chemical called Fadabis, which is what we use to detect the presence of amylase, which is found in saliva. So if that test is positive, it indicates that there could possibly be saliva on that particular sample.
And with regard to item 51, what did you find?
It was positive.
So there was amylase indicated that there had been the presence of saliva at one time.
Yes, that's correct.
And did you then conduct DNA testing on item 51 to try and determine, on the swabbing from item 51, to try and determine the source of that saliva?
Yes, I did.
And did you conduct the DNA testing in accordance with the standard operating procedures you need to do in an accredited lab for DNA testing?
Yes, I did.
And did you have a known DNA profile for George Floyd?
Yes, I had a known DNA sample from Mr. Floyd that I had previously developed in my first round of testing.
So based on the testing of item 51 and that known sample, what did you find?
From item 51, that the swab collected from that pill, I obtained a single source male DNA profile that matches George Floyd. This DNA profile would not be expected to occur more than once among unrelated individuals in the world population.
So after you did your testing on item 51, did you make it available for other sections of the lab?
Yes, it was sent to drug chemistry after I was done.
Now, I've deviated a little from the original search of the squad car, the processing. So I want to go back to May 27th when you first processed the squad car, okay?
Okay.
You mentioned finding some apparent blood in the squad car, correct?
Yes.
And where was that located?
The blood was primarily located in the rear passenger side of the vehicle.
And have you seen what we have marked exhibits 177 through 182?
Yes, I have.
Your Honor, I would offer those.
177 through 182 are received.
I'm going to show you exhibit 177, please. When you are processing a vehicle and you see something that appears to be blood, is there something you can do to try and determine if it is in fact blood?
Yes, we have a presumptive blood test that we use. So we'll take a small portion of a stain that we think is blood, swab it up, and then use a 3-step chemical process on that swab. If the test is positive, the swab will turn pink. If it's negative, it'll stay. The color will stay unchanged.
And so when you are doing that, when you see things that might be blood stains, do you do that test for each of those blood stains?
Yes, for each of the blood stains, it would get its own presumptive test. Yes.
We see in the center of this photograph, exhibit 177, that strap you had mentioned earlier. But then there are also these 3 white tags. Can you describe those for the jurors?
Yes, the 3 white stickers you can see are items 12, 13, and 14. Those are marking locations of potential blood stains. And then also on those stickers is a little notation. It says pH positive, and that means that that blood test that I performed was positive.
And do you recall how many separate stains you collected from that squad car that appeared to be blood, at least in this area of the squad car?
In this particular portion of the squad car, on the seat bottom, there was 4 different blood stains.
And then in other areas of the seat?
And then on the seat back, the rear passenger seat back, were an additional 4 stains.
So if we then go to exhibit 178, can you describe what we're seeing here?
In exhibit 178, you can see a photograph. In the center is an item marked item 10 with that pH positive. So this is marking a blood stain that was positive for the presumptive blood test. And then this is on the rear passenger seat back. And then item number 11, which is a little bit out of the photograph, is more in the door frame of the vehicle. And that was also positive for the presence of blood.
And so in this photograph, exhibit 178, what we're seeing on the left side as you're looking at it is what?
That's the door frame, or the very edge of the rear passenger seat on the seat back side.
If we can go then to exhibit 179, describe this for the jurors, please.
These are 2 stains that are on the rear passenger seat bottom that have both been marked as items 14 and 15, and that pH positive, indicating that the blood test was positive.
It appears these are in the same areas where we saw that strap, item 9, sitting before.
Yes, the strap is right next to it.
And then if we can go to exhibit 180, describe this, please.
This is an item marked as BCA item 16. This was on the rear passenger seat back. And this, again, was an area that was positive for the presence of blood.
And exhibit 181.
This is a photograph of the seat back as well. And you can see 2 items of 2 stickers. Item 10 is an area that was positive for the presence of blood. And item 18 is also marking what I believed was possibly a blood stain. I didn't do the presumptive blood test while processing the squad at this particular time due to how small the stain was.
And then finally, exhibit 182. Now the strap has been removed and we see some other items here, correct?
Correct. This was after the strap was removed, and this denotes the 4 locations on the rear passenger seat bottom where blood was indicated, and I collected samples from each of those 4 areas.
So as we've seen then, there were, by my calculations, 7 different blood-like stains, 6 of which presumptively tested positive as blood, correct?
There were 7 that presumptively tested positive for blood and 1 additional, so for a total of 8.
8. And did you then, well, just describe for the jury where those generally were located in the squad car?
They were all on the rear passenger side of the vehicle.
And did you conduct further, well, let me ask you this. Did you take samples of those back to the BCA with you?
Yes, I collected a sample from each of those locations. They all were packaged up individually, and then they were sent for DNA testing.
And was DNA testing done on that?
Yes, they were.
Who did
on
that?
all of them. I did the DNA testing on those samples.
And when you tested each of those, did you follow the standard procedures necessary for your lab and DNA testing?
Yes, I did.
And what was the result of that testing?
From all 8 of those locations, I obtained a single source male DNA profile that matches George Floyd. And again, this DNA profile would not be expected to occur more than once among unrelated individuals in the world population.
So that was George Floyd's blood?
Yes, essentially.
I have nothing further, Your Honor.
Any cross? Well, we'll take our 10-minute break if you have cross. All right, 10 minutes, please. Mr. Nelson?
I have no questions for this case.
All right, thank you. You're excused. Members of the jury, we're going to try and fit in these last two witnesses because they're very quick, but I am cognizant you have lives, and so if we don't finish by 5, we're going to cut off before 5.
Your Honor, the state would call Brianna Giles to the stand.
Raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
See? And if you feel comfortable removing your mask, we'd prefer you do so to be able to be heard clearly. And begin by giving us your full name, spelling each of your names.
Brianna Giles, Briahnagiles.
Mr. Frank.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ms. Giles, how are you currently employed?
I'm a forensic scientist in the drug chemistry section of the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, also known as the BCA.
And can you describe for the jurors your educational background to be a forensic scientist?
I earned my Bachelor's of Science in Biochemistry from the University of Wisconsin-Madison and my Master's of Science in Biomedical Forensic Sciences from Boston University. I've also undergone various training in both of my employment.
So when did you obtain your bachelor's degree in biochemistry?
2009.
And your master's?
2011.
And where have you worked since obtaining your Bachelor of Science degree in this field?
I worked for 4 years in Dallas County, Texas, at the Southwestern Institute of Forensic Sciences as a drug chemist in the forensic science.
And how long did you do that?
4 years.
And when did you leave that job?
2017.
And where did you go to work from there?
At the BCA.
And have you been at the BCA ever since?
Yes.
And do you have any professional affiliations, any groups that you belong to?
Yes.
And can you tell the jurors what those are?
I am a member of the American Academy of Forensic Sciences, a member of the Midwestern Academy of Forensic Sciences, and a member of the Clandestine Laboratory Investigating Chemist Association.
And can you tell the jurors, in maintaining your competence in this field, what kind of trainings you go to?
I attend various conferences, webinars, keep up on current articles, and try and stay up to date with all of the changing discipline in our field.
So what kinds of things do you do as a chemist at the BCA?
I analyze unknown substances for the presence or absence of controlled substances and generate reports on those findings, maintain the chain of custody, and testify in court as needed.
And were you asked to perform some testing on items in the case that brings us to court today?
Yes.
And do you recall what the first item was that you tested?
Yes.
And what was that item?
It was an apparent glass pipe.
And given your history, your work history, and your training and experience, did you inspect that visually? And if so, what did you think of it?
Yes, I inspected it visually and performed analysis according to our policies and procedures.
And what kind of testing did you do on that pipe?
I performed a presumptive test and a confirmation test.
What's the presumptive test?
In this case, the presumptive test was a color test.
What does that tell you?
It gives me an indication of what the substance could be.
So how do you, test the pipe? What do you do to get something to test?
For a pipe or an apparent type of smoking device, I will
scrape out a portion of residue that is on the device and use that for testing.
And so with this particular pipe, did you find any like green leafy material or anything of that nature?
There was only visible charred residue.
And in your job as a chemist for the BCA, how often do you see this where you have a pipe with some residue in it?
Very often.
And so did you perform some testing on that residue?
Yes.
And did you follow all the procedures necessary for a chemist at the BCA in doing that testing?
Yes.
And what were the results of that testing?
That the material contained tetrahydrocannabinol, or THC, and that no marijuana was identified.
So what does that mean? What is THC?
It is the main psychoactive ingredient found in marijuana.
And by finding no marijuana, what do you mean by that?
There was no visible plant material that was able to be identified as marijuana.
And so this would indicate that it had been used at some point in the past, is all, right? It's a really poorly worded question, isn't it? The finding of this residue, does that really tell you anything about the pipe itself?
Just that the pipe contained the material that was found.
Okay. And were you asked to conduct some additional testing on some other items, or some testing on some additional items, I should say?
Yes.
And did that include item 48?
Yes.
And can you describe for the jurors what item 48 is?
A white round tablet with apparent pharmaceutical markings.
Now, were there actually 2 pills in item 48?
Yes.
And did you test them at separate times?
Yes.
Okay. When you initially tested them, can you describe for the jurors, the condition of item 48, or at least one of the pills? Well, let me ask you this way. Did the 2 pills look consistent with one another?
Yes.
And so can you describe for the jurors the appearance of the pill when you saw it?
Both pills appeared the same, both white and round with markings, RP on one side and 10/325 on the other side.
And you mentioned earlier pharmaceutical markings. What did you mean by that?
The markings RP 10325, they had a mark or a logo on both sides of the tablet.
Now, in your job, do you have to become familiar with how manufacturers mark their pills?
Somewhat, yes.
Okay. And when you saw these markings, did you recognize them as anything?
I did not.
Okay. So they're just markings on those pills?
Yes.
And so it's not like you recognize these as markings for aspirin or something of that nature?
Correct.
And so initially you only tested one of the pills. Why was that?
Per our policy at the BCA, typically when we receive multiple tablets in a submission, we only will analyze one of that population if they're all similar, unless it is requested that additional tablets are analyzed.
And did that in fact happen here?
Yes.
Who requested that you, do you remember who requested that you test both pills?
Agent Reyerson.
Okay. And describe for the jurors how you go about testing these pills.
With tablets that will have markings, the first thing I will do will be take a weight of the tablet. The second would be to look up the markings using a database to determine if they're pharmaceutically made type of tablets, which would give me an indication of what the tablet could contain. And that will be followed by a confirmatory test to show what's in the tablet.
So these markings you did not recognize as any manufacturer's marking?
Not upon my visual observation.
Okay. And then, so how do you take a sample of these pills for testing?
I use a razor blade and scrape off a portion of the pill.
And what kind of testing do you do on these pills, or did you do on these pills?
So the first type of testing is looking up the markings, and upon looking up the markings in the database, The markings did indicate the material contained oxycodone and acetaminophen. I followed that up by scraping off a portion of the tablets and putting it into a liquid, and that liquid is then injected onto a gas chromatograph mass spectrometer, or GCMS.
Now, you indicated that the markings on the pills indicated, I'm going to butcher it if I try it, but that they contained what?
Oxycodone and acetaminophen.
Now, in your experience and your training in this field, do you know whether sometimes homemade pills are given those same markings to make them look legitimate?
Yes.
That can happen?
Yes.
And so in this case, you got that initial indication from the markings, but you proceeded to follow through with the testing, correct?
Yes.
And you tested both of those pills, correct?
Yes.
And did you follow all the standard procedures you need to do when performing that kind of testing for your laboratory?
Yes.
And what were the results of the testing?
The tablets contained methamphetamine and fentanyl.
And are you able at the BCA lab to quantify how much methamphetamine or fentanyl are in those pills?
For methamphetamine, yes. For fentanyl, no.
And so were you asked to do some additional testing with other items in this case?
Yes.
And were those items 51, 52, and 53?
Yes.
All right, so let's look at item 51 first. That item, can you describe for the jurors the condition of that item when you saw it?
It appeared to be a partial white and pink tablet with no observable markings.
And did you then test that item as well?
Yes.
And again, cut a portion of it off for the testing?
Yes.
And did you follow the necessary procedures to conduct the testing on that item as well?
Yes.
And what were the results of that testing?
Methamphetamine.
And were you able to detect any other controlled substances in that pill through that testing?
Not conclusively.
And what do you mean by that?
Per our policies and our procedures, there are certain requirements that we have to conclusively identify a substance. Methamphetamine was the only substance that was identified.
So were there other substances that were not detected in a sufficient amount to have you identify them as present?
Yes.
And do you know what substance that would have been that you found that way?
Per our testing, I can't confirm or state any identity of those substances.
Okay. And that's because you have to have you have to identify a certain amount before you can say it's present.
Yes.
We might call that a threshold, right?
We don't use that word in this type of testing.
It's just not enough there to say it's there.
It doesn't meet all of the requirements that we have to give an identification.
I should have asked you just to explain rather than me try to do it. But, all right, so did you also then do testing on item 52?
Yes.
And did you incidentally weigh item 52?
Yes.
Do you remember the approximate weight?
0.019 plus or minus 0.005 grams.
So can you give us some scale there? Is that in terms of a pill? Is that a small weight, a large weight?
It was a partial amount of what would be a tablet. If you think of a normal type of Tylenol type tablet, you're going to get a weight approximately about 0.5 grams. This was 0.019.
And did you also conduct testing on item 52 using the appropriate procedures for your laboratory?
Yes.
And what was the result of that testing?
Methamphetamine.
Were you able to identify any other substances in that pill?
No.
And item 53, Did you also conduct some testing on item 53?
Yes.
And can you describe the condition of item 53 when you looked at it?
Similar in appearance to item 51 and 52, only a much smaller amount.
Do you recall the weight of item 53?
It was less than 0.01 grams.
So even less than 52.
Yes.
And did you conduct testing on that item as well using the standard procedures in your laboratory?
Yes.
And what was the result of that testing?
Methamphetamine.
Were you able to call the presence of any other substances in item 53?
No.
And did you also, or did you conduct some testing on item 54?
I did not.
Why not?
It was not submitted to me for analysis.
Okay. That's all I have, Your Honor.
Mr. Nelson?
Good afternoon. Just a couple of very brief questions, ma'am. The first test you did was the testing of the marijuana, correct? The pipe where you recovered THC, correct?
Yes.
All right. But then the second test you did in report number 9, you tested the pills that appeared to have the pharmaceutical markings, correct?
Yes.
You looked up those pharmaceutical markings. They were consistent with oxycodone, correct, and Tylenol?
And acetaminophen, yes.
And acetaminophen, okay. And the weight of those pills was 0.397 plus or minus 0.005 grams, correct?
That was the weight of one of those pills.
One of those pills. And those pills were, did not appear to be, you could see the pharmaceutical markings on them, right?
Yes.
Now, the items that you tested, 51, 52, and 53, 51 appeared to be a more consistent pill, correct? Like looked like a pill.
Yes, it looked like a partial pill.
And that weight was 0.269 plus or minus 0.005 grams, correct?
Yes.
And 52 was more of a part of what appeared to be a pill, right?
Yes.
And that was 0.019 grams, correct?
Yes.
Plus or minus the 0.005.
Yes.
And so the difference between item number 52 and item number 48 would be 0.39 grams, give or take, right?
Can you repeat what items those were?
Sure. Item 52 was 0.019, and item 48 was 0.397.
Yes.
Okay. And then you did, just to be clear, item 48 came from the center console of the Mercedes-Benz, or were identified as coming from the center console of the Mercedes-Benz, correct?
To my knowledge, yes.
And that's what was reported to you?
Yes.
And the other items, 51, 52, 53, and 54, they came from the back seat, or they were identified as coming from the back seat of Squad 320, correct?
I can't speak to 54,
But
but 51, 52, and 53, yes.
They were identified coming from the back seat of Squad 320.
Yes.
And in terms of is it fair to say that there was some evidence that didn't meet your laboratory scientific threshold or scientific standards that a different controlled substance was potentially present?
There were indications of other substances. I can't speak to whether they are controlled or not controlled substances.
Okay. And those were brought to the attention of everybody involved, right?
For business purposes, it is in my notes.
Okay. And that was fentanyl.
I can't confirm.
because it simply didn't meet that laboratory requirement
Yes.
in terms of quantity, right?
The testing I did not have any type of quantitative measurement.
But in terms of whatever other markings you may be looking for, right? Whatever guidelines. You can't say it was or wasn't fentanyl.
Yes.
I have nothing further.
Anything further? All right, thank you. You may sit down. Next witness? Last one.
State call Susan Lee.
You raise your right hand. You swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth and nothing but the truth.
I did.
Proceed. And if you wouldn't mind removing your mask for testimony, that would be excellent. And let's begin by having you state your full name, spelling each of your names.
Susan Lynn Neith, Neith.
Susan, common spelling?
Susan.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Ms. Neith.
Hello.
Where do you work, ma'am?
I work at NMS Labs in Pennsylvania.
And what's your job title?
I'm a forensic chemist.
How long have you worked at NMS Labs?
I've worked for approximately 27 years, 15 of which in the capacity of a forensic chemist.
What did you do there other than being a forensic chemist?
I did GLP testing as a study manager. And I also did quantitative analysis in biological samples.
You mentioned GOP testing. What is that?
That stands for Good Laboratory Practices. We conducted studies on animal assays, clinical trials, and we would test the samples from the animals and create reports regarding the findings of those studies.
Prior to joining NMS Labs, did you have any other lab or pharmaceutical experience?
I did work in the pharmaceutical industry for about 7 years.
Could you describe your educational background for the jury?
I have a Bachelor of Science degree in medical technology from Hahnemann University in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania.
And do you have any specialized training or certifications to do the work you do as a forensic chemist?
I'm certified by the American Board of Criminalistics in drug analysis, and I also have a license from the Texas Forensic Science Commission in drug analysis as well.
And are you up to date on all of the requirements for licensure and certification?
Yes.
Getting back to NMS Labs, is NMS a licensed and accredited laboratory?
Yes.
And in terms of your job as a forensic chemist, can you maybe describe your job duties on a day-to-day basis for the jurors?
Yes, I analyze substances for the presence of controlled substance or other pharmaceutical drugs. I perform quantitative analysis as well for controlled substances and pharmaceutical drugs. I prepare reports that summarize the findings of my analysis, and I also do peer review of other analysts' data. I do instrument maintenance, calibration, troubleshooting, and I also represent NMS at forensic meetings, doing presentations as well.
And approximately how many tests have you performed as a forensic chemist at NMS Labs over the course of your career?
Approximately 6,000 tests, approximately 4,000 of which were quantitative analysis.
And you talked about quantitative analysis. Could you just describe what that is and what that process looks like?
It's a process to determine how much drug is in a substance, what the concentration is.
And do you follow certain steps in order to perform a quantitative analysis?
Yes, we have standard operating procedures.
And just sort of as a general overview, what steps do you go through when you get a substance for quantitative analysis?
So the evidence will come in, we will open it and describe it and take an analytical weight of the material. And then when we perform the analysis, we will generate a calibration curve from a certified reference standard. So that means I will make 4 different levels of that drug and create a calibration curve from that. Also, we will prepare, or I will prepare a control sample as well to run along to show that our line is good. And the sample itself will be prepared in triplicate. We run it 3 separate times and we report the mean concentration of those 3 replicates. We also do another replicate where we add a known amount of the drug of interest to show that we are recovering the drug from the matrix that it's in.
So you described doing an initial weight of the substance you receive, is that right?
Yes.
And then subsequently going through this process for testing. Is that accurate?
That's accurate.
And are there particular tests you do for identification and then additional testing you might do for confirmation?
Yes, depending on the analysis requested, we will do an identification as well to assure that the drug that we want to quantitate is actually in the sample first. And then we do a screening method by gas chromatography mass spectrometry to identify the compounds that are in the substance. And then from there, we can do a targeted analysis for quantitative analysis. So that analysis is specific for one individual drug.
And then you also described that there's a peer review process as well. That's standard operating procedure for NMS labs, is that right?
Yes.
So I'm going to talk about or ask you some questions about some testing that you did related to this case. Did you receive 3 pills from the BCA to perform testing on?
Yes.
And did those consist of 2 pills identified as Bca Item 48, as well as 1 pill identified as, or a partial pill identified as Bca Item 51?
That's correct.
And did you do a quantitative analysis for each of those pills to determine both the amounts of fentanyl and methamphetamine in each of those 3 substances?
I did.
Let's talk first about item 41, which was the 2 pills together. What was your understanding of where those pills had come from?
Did you mean 48?
I'm sorry, 48.
Okay.
48.
It's my understanding they were retrieved from the console of a Mercedes.
And what condition were those pills in item 48 in when you received them for testing?
They were not complete tablets. They had a portion that appeared to be cut off of it, so I couldn't read the exact monogramming on either tablet. They appeared to be round tablets, nothing out of the ordinary.
You mentioned some monogramming. Did you note monogramming on those pills?
It's noted in the description on the analytical report.
And would it refresh your recollection to see your report to describe that monogramming?
Yes.
I would put on the screen just for the witness to refresh her recollection. Exhibit 628, please. And looking now at your report, does that refresh your recollection with respect to what you observed in terms of monogramming on item 48?
Yes.
And what did you observe?
The first tablet from agency item number 48 was a partial round white tablet that was monogrammed with a 0 and a 2-5 on one side and a capital P on the other side. The second tablet in agency item number 48 was a partial round white tablet that was monogrammed 325 on one side and capital R, capital P on the other side.
And aside from the portions of those pills that may have been cut to perhaps eliminate some portion of the monogramming, did they appear consistent with one another?
They appeared to be.
All right, we can take that down, thank you. Did you initially perform fentanyl quantification testing on those two pills identified as BCA item 48?
Yes.
And what do you have to do after taking a weight in terms of next steps for that process to occur?
So I photographed the tablets because I wanted to grind them before analysis to ensure that they're fully mixed before I take samples for analysis. So to preserve the visual appearance of the tablet before I did that, I took a photograph and then ground the tablets.
And then did you ultimately come up with a quantitative level with respect to fentanyl in those items, the two pills that were part of item 48?
Yes.
And then did you also later perform additional quantification testing, quantitative testing on item 48 for purposes of identifying methamphetamine?
Yes, I did.
And did you follow that same type of process, although the pills would already have been ground at that point, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Did you also perform testing on an item identified as BCA item 51?
Yes.
And what was your understanding of where that item originated from?
It originated in the rear passenger side of a squad car, a police car.
And did you perform quantitative testing for both fentanyl and methamphetamine on that item as well?
Yes, I did.
And what was the condition of BCA item 51 when you first received it for testing?
That was also a partial tablet with no visible monogramming of any kind on, and it had a little bit of what appeared to be red staining on the tablet.
Was the texture of that item different in any way from the other two pills you had previously tested?
It seemed to have a rougher surface consistency compared to the other two that were smoother in appearance.
Ultimately, did you issue a report documenting your findings with respect to the fentanyl and methamphetamine levels in both of the pills in item 48 as well as the pill in BCA item 51?
Yes.
Do you recall the details of those findings offhand?
I would need to view the report again.
And we will put Exhibit 628 up just for the witness to refresh her recollection. And seeing your report, does that refresh your recollection with respect to your findings?
Yes.
And this continues on from page 1 to page 2, so just focusing in on the first part of your findings. What did you find with respect to BCA item 48?
In both of those cases, the fentanyl concentration was less than 1%. For the NMS Exhibit 1, which was the first tablet of item 48, the methamphetamine was 1.9%, and again, fentanyl less than 1%. For NMS item 2, or the second tablet in item 48, the fentanyl was less than 1%, and the methamphetamine was 2%.
And then, with respect to BCA item 51, what were your findings with respect to BCA item 51?
Fentanyl was less than 1%, and methamphetamine purity was 2.9%.
And with respect to fentanyl, is that amount, well, how does that amount, this less than 1% amount, compare to what you would expect to see for street fentanyl in your experience?
In my personal experience in when I've quantitated fentanyl in powders or tablets, generally we see levels that are low and less than 1% or maybe slightly above 1%.
So having a level under 1% with respect to fentanyl purity is common, and sometimes it may be slightly higher. Is that your experience?
In my experience, yes.
And with respect to the amounts of methamphetamine, ranging from 1.9% through 2.9% purity, how does that compare to what you typically see in your line of work for street or recreational methamphetamine?
That result is low. Generally, we see higher levels in methamphetamine samples that I have tested.
And when you say higher levels, approximately what percentages of purity do you typically look at for street methamphetamine?
Majority of the time I see 90 to 100% methamphetamine.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Mr. Nelson?
No question.
All right, thank you. You are excused. Members of the jury, we're going to recess until tomorrow morning. We have some matters to take care of, but we're still going to shoot for 9:15 tomorrow. Thank you.